So, what is an emotional trigger really? I do think that by understanding this, you will have more self compassion if this is for you. And if you are watching this for someone else in your life who's emotionally triggered often, I believe it will give you more compassion for that person because the emotional trigger is actually a biological happening, a neurobiological happening in the body. So, an emotional trigger is when sensory information or a particular type of event or a particular pattern that might happen between people triggers the emotions of something similar that happened way in the past. And when it does this, it triggers the physiological feelings of that event that happened way back when, as well as the emotional feelings, as well as the cognitions or thoughts that went with that event. And it triggers the negative thinking about the self and the world that happened way back when with that event. Now, this is usually talked about with regard to traumatic experiences and traumatic events, but not everybody relates to the word trauma. And really, you could think of this as being sort of a very emotionally upsetting event that happened to you in the past. And the earlier these things happened in your life and the more often they happened, the stronger that link is going to be between the sensory information, event, or pattern and the emotional and physiological and cognitive response you had at that time. So, when we have a memory that triggers us, a different part of our brain lights up, and that trigger memory automatically activates our amygdala, our fight, flight, freeze center, our survival center. So, the original events that created the trigger may have been very survival based. They might have been a threat to our lives or a threat to our personhood, a deep threat to the connection we had with caregivers, which is life threatening for children. But the current day event that's happening is not life threatening. Yet, that part of our brain kicks in and we want to fight, flee, or freeze. So, an example of this, a very common example, would be that your boss gets angry at you. And maybe your boss is a shouter, maybe not, but they're not happy with you. And boom, you might be triggered into a fight, flight, freeze response. And you might know that your response is outsized to the actual event. You might know that your response is this big when really this is upsetting, but it's this upsetting, not this upsetting. That's really at the core of emotional triggers and trauma triggers is that the feelings are so overwhelming and so much more than one would expect in the moment that we don't really understand it and those around us don't understand it. So the people around us might be very critical, like, you're making way too big a deal of this. Yeah, okay, so your boss is a jerk, but it's not that upsetting. But for you, it might cause days and days of rumination and going over and over it, right? So there's a number of things that the original event could have been that caused this, right? It could have been an overly critical parent. It could have been a parent who raged where you actually were in physical danger. Or it could have been a parent who screamed and got upset and then withdrew and disappeared. And all of those things, as I mentioned earlier, these are all threatening to the survival of a child, both on a practical level and on like a self development level. Our sense of who we are and our ability to develop and grow as individuals, right? That can be threatened with these events. So, other examples, a very well known, very typical example is when the Vietnam vets came back from Vietnam, which is actually when we began to learn a lot more about trauma. But the classic example of a car backfiring and the person who'd been in Vietnam hits the ground thinking it's a bomb. Now, this happens before your conscious mind is aware of it. So, before your conscious mind is aware that that was a car backfiring, not a bomb, you've responded. Because your amygdala wants to keep you alive, it acts really fast, but it's not always accurate. And the same thing with the boss yelling at you. Your conscious mind is not saying, wow, I'm in physical danger here, but your body goes there right away. Recently, I've had a few questions about fear of abandonment. And fear of abandonment kind of works the same way. If you had a parent who disappeared, maybe there was divorce or one parent moved away, or even if a parent died, or it could be a parent who was very depressed who would withdraw whenever anything conflictual happened. But that act of being left gets embedded in that emotional brain, along with all the panicked feelings of the time that you had as a child, the negative thinking you might have had, and often it's negative thinking about the self. If I were different, they would have stayed. If I wasn't bad, they wouldn't have left. So, the part of the brain that really lights up with these trigger memories is the posterior cingulate cortex. And that part of the brain lights up with PTSD memories more than others. But it's involved not just in memory, but also in self referential thought. So when we're really deep in thinking about ourselves, that part of the brain is very active. So that's why these memories go with a lot of negative self talk. And these events trigger our negative core beliefs. So what do you do about this? So I want to recommend a couple of my other videos. I just put out one. It's called Trauma and EMDR, but it really goes into why trauma, or you could view it, just think very upsetting memory. If you don't like the word trauma, doesn't have to relate to trauma, but very upsetting memories get lodged in your brain differently and what you can do about it. And that video provides some practical tools. And I'll post all of these here at the end. There's also one on why anxiety hits out of the blue, which is like, boom, something happens, you're not even consciously aware of it, and you feel anxious. And then I have a bunch on emotional regulation and the skills. So all of those videos help point you a little bit more towards the solution. And then I also want to share a free resource that I have, which is a PDF called Transform Your Negative Core Belief. It helps you identify what that negative core belief is, and it gives you 3 very practical tools to begin to heal that belief, to heal some of those deeper things. Because the thing about these emotional triggers, whether they're full out trauma triggers or just very upsetting event triggers, is that you can heal from this. I'll share a personal example here that just recently came up for me. But I want you to know that by bringing in your frontal lobe, when you feel that trigger, when you become aware that your response is like this, but the actual event is like this upsetting, not this upsetting, but your response is like this. That's the moment you can say, okay, this is triggering something from the past and it's not happening now. Then using tools like diaphragmatic breathing to calm down in the moment will help you bring in the thought that, okay, that was a long time ago. It feels like now, but it was a long time ago. So the personal example that recently came up is I explained to my husband, like, yeah, sometimes I can get really anxious waiting in line. And this is because I had a parent who had a horrible temper and hated waiting in line and hated if you made him wait. So making other people wait can make me feel anxious. Now, I've done enough work where I can be like, okay, deep breath. I'm just waiting in line. Nothing bad happening here. But that initial little bit of anxious energy might still come up for me. But I know what to attribute it to. I attribute it to something that happened decades ago. And I don't let my mind go to a place where it's attributed to something that's actually happening now, because nothing's happening now. So that might be somewhat of a minor example. And I don't want you to feel like, oh no, I do all sorts of work and I still end up with that. But this is not like an overwhelming thing for me at this point because those memories have been processed. So I want to encourage you. You can get there. Professional help really can help. And if you're really struggling, I really encourage you to reach out to someone. And that work can be complemented with videos like this and with my other more skill based videos that point you to the steps and the things that need to be practiced regularly, daily, but that can overall calm your physiological system help you make these connections and lead you to a more joyful life. Okay, if you like this, please do hit that like button and please subscribe. It really helps me to continue to make more material. All right, see you next week.